Worship involves the whole of creation, as Jess showed us last week. We've got a whole series on the topic of worship, but where do you go from that? It seems as though we've started with the thing that most needs to be said. Isn't anything we say going to be an anticlimax after that? Well, no. But today we are going to go to the heights and the depths of worship. First, we're going to look at the fact that worship is, or should be, about God, the heights. And later in the service, we'll look at the fact that also worship can get hijacked, the depths. Creation is awesome, as we saw last week. And one of the aspects of that is that the more human skill develops, the more we get to see how wonderful the world is. The reason we're able to see the species around us and see what they get up to is because our technology is improving. We get videos from drones so that animals don't run away scared because they hardly notice it or can tell that it isn't actually a predator. We get videos from drones, we get videos from submarines, we even get videos in the dark using infrared cameras. We can see creation in all its splendour more and more as technology lets us do that. This is true not just for all the life around us, but for the subatomic particles and things. So the Higgs boson, what on earth a boson is, there was no such thing as a boson when I was in school, but it's one of those things that's down inside atoms, apparently, are so small that you couldn't possibly see it. And yet, although the idea has been around since the 1960s, in 2012 they did see one. Well, saw the signs of one. It could be observed using the amazing big circular thing called the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Europe, particle collider. So we're able to see things smaller than we've ever been able to see before and find out what's sort of inside. But then big scale as well. The Hubble telescope has been giving us views from space of the universe around us that are far clearer than anything we've ever seen before. And on Christmas Day, they launched the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to be even better. It's already arrived in orbit at the right place beyond the moon, further away than the moon. And it's about to look into space. It's unfolded itself, and it's actually sitting there chilling, which seems a bit of an anticlimax after all that launching and travelling and unfolding. But apparently it has to chill a bit before it's going to look into space. But it's promised to give us even better views, to be able to see things further away than we've ever seen before. So, worship involves the whole of creation. Creation is awesome, and we're getting to see that better all the time. But so what? How is that worship? Is that worship? A lot of people see the wonders of creation and say, well, yes, I see creation, but I don't see God. People do say, yes, we look into space and we can see that we humans are very small. But then again, people look at all kinds of other aspects and say, yes, but humans are special. So Dawkins, who writes about genetics and is good with animals and plants and things, in his book The Selfish Gene, says that each species is actually just a vehicle for its genes to perpetuate themselves. Selfish genes doing their thing. So even when we're kind to people, actually we might be kind as individuals, but the motivation for it is because our genes are being selfish. When we're kind to people, it helps our species survive better, people with genes like ours. So Dawkins accepts that there's something special about humans, but what he says is special about humans is that we're the first species ever to understand genes, and that we as individuals are just vehicles for the genes that are propagating themselves through us. So it's a slight anticlimax, really, for humans being special. And the odd thing is that he says we know this, but he hasn't quite worked out what we do with that knowledge. Big question. And actually, there is something special about humans from the point of view of psychiatrists and our brains. Robin Murray says, we won't be able to understand the brain. He means the human brain. It is the most complex thing in the universe. Other things may be bigger, but with all the different intricate connections that happen in a human brain, the possibilities and the complexity are just on a massively bigger scale in the human brain than in a star or a moon. So what do we learn by looking at the wonders of creation? One other discussion is the Goldilocks enigma. Paul Davies christened it in his book. The question, why is the universe just right for life? How have we ended up in a universe where it's possible to live, on a planet where it's possible to live? People are realizing, the more we look, that this is actually not something we can take for granted. It's a surprise. Earth is nice to live on, but it's really hard to find any other planet that might be possible to live on. This universe is a universe where things are stable enough and work in ways where it's possible for complicated life to evolve. But if some of the fundamental parameters of the universe were just a tiny bit different, the universe would have just collapsed into itself or turned into a great big blob of something amorphous and hot. It could never have actually evolved anything complicated. The universe seems to be fine-tuned to be a place where life is possible. Is this really random chance, or is it God's fingerprints? Well, it's something people will always argue about. But as a believer in the God, and in the God of the Bible in particular, I'm happy to say that these are signs of God's fingerprints all over our world. In Romans chapter 1, Paul basically says, even people who've never heard of the God of the Jews have no excuse for ignoring what God is like, because just looking at the world shows you what God is like. I've always told our children, although the world is a bit of a mess, look for what is true, what is right, and what is beautiful. So whether or not you believe the theology that people tell you, the things that people tell you from their own particular point of view, whether you trust the people who are telling you or not, whether you actually believe in things, if you're trying to work out what to believe, how do you do that? Well, it makes sense to look for what is true, what is right, and what is beautiful, in a world where we know that there is much that is deceitful, evil, and horrible. If God is the God of truth, he will show through. So creation is awesome. And from the point of view of faith, we would say that that points to the fact that God is even more awesome. It also points to the fact that God is good. God brings order out of chaos. But also there is such a thing as loving provision. God has provided what we need. It's not random. There is a loving personal God who is providing. And there is such a thing as good and evil. If people matter and are not random, values matter. So how does that connect with the God of the Bible? Well, he revealed himself not only in creation, but also to Israel. And having saved them from being slaves in Egypt and brought them towards the promised land which they were about to go into, that's the time when they had seen God at work in their lives, when God said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." Israel would worship God both because creation is awesome and because they could see God at work in creation and in their own lives as a nation. And as Christians, we can say that too, not just looking at the Exodus, but looking at the cross. When we look at Jesus, we can say it makes sense to talk about God and to claim that he is a God who we know. We know who he is and what he's like. So for worship, when it comes to worship, it's easy to think that the rest of creation joins in with us when we worship. It's actually a bit the wrong way around. When we worship, we're joining in with the rest of creation that are doing it naturally. We are so easily distracted. But creation is doing it all the time. Not just the angels in heaven, but the stars, as we heard last week, and the creatures around us. Also, worship is not really about something special that we can do for God. It might look like that, but creation simply does worship because God simply is special. So for us, worship is what happens when God helps us see that and when our hearts respond. We can easily get distracted by our cleverness and technology, by our own gifts and creativity with music or with the wonders of telescopes and the things we can see and get to see next. But worship is not about us being awesome. It's not even really about creation being awesome. True worship is about God. He is the one who is truly awesome. So, what do the following three have in common? Frank Sinatra, a famous crooner from the movies. Elvis Presley, also in movies, but some would see him as the father of rock and roll. And Sid Vicious, one of the most notorious of the punk. Goodness, can you even call him a musician? Possibly. What do those three have in common? Okay, they're all singers. They also, each of them, sang the song My Way, which says something about how popular the song is and how it spanned different genres. The song My Way is one that has remained popular. I did it my way. Obviously that resonates with a lot of people because it stayed popular. Here are some of the lyrics. Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. I faced it all and I stood tall and did it my way. To say all the things he truly feels and not the words of one who kneels, the record shows. I took the blows, but I did it my way. And that's how the song finishes. The idea of being independent, fiercely independent, is built into that song. Also into a famous poem called Invictus, the Latin for undefeated, by the Victorian British poet William Henley. William Henley was the original inspiration for the pirate Long John Silver. He faced a lot of challenges. He had tuberculosis as a teenager, and one of his legs had to be amputated, which is why Long John Silver, the one-legged pirate, was based on this real guy. Sadly, he later on lost his other foot as well. So he had a tough life. And his most enduring poem, Undefeated, includes these words. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And there the poem ends. There is a strong, fierce independence built into many of us. But sadly, that is the opposite of worship. One of the alternatives to worshipping God, our Creator, on whom we can depend. Mark Twain said that humankind is the only animal that blushes or needs to, while the rest of creation might be managing to give praise to God and show how awesome He is. Much of what we do as humans fails to do that. So worship can get hijacked. It is what we're designed for. And yet, when we go our own way, it can amount to idolizing ourselves, making ourselves the thing that matters most in our lives. We can also idolize other people. American Idol was the top-ranked American TV program for 8 years in a row. It's a singing competition. But what does the title tell us about the atmosphere? The people who win the singing competitions are supposed to be idolized by their fans. It's not a very helpful choice of words. But it is always a temptation to look on others as ideal, as either people we want to be like, or just people that we can't bear to hear criticised because we think they're wonderful. And yet they always fall short of the God who we're designed to worship. And in our worship, even in Christian communities, there are dangers, the same dangers. The danger of idolizing a worship leader, of idolizing a pastor. All of these things could be a problem. And even idolizing our own community. And we're studying gospel-centered community at the moment in home groups. Is there a danger that we treat our community as though it's some kind of idol that should be above reproach, that should be our focus? Well, focus on contributing makes sense, but focus as though we were worshipping it would be a mistake. All of these are mistakes that we might make. And the reading we've just had, where Satan appears to Jesus, tempting him to take over the world by kneeling down before Satan, worshipping him, he uses the word, is a temptation that was a real temptation for Jesus. He really could take over the world. And yet God's way for Jesus to take over the world was by humble, self-sacrificial service, not Satan's way at all. And yet that story helps us not just with an insight into Jesus' situation, but into ours as well. It is also Satan who lies behind all of the alternatives to worshipping God. Anything else we worship instead is not second best, it's simply wrong. True worship is about God. So let's take care not to idolize pop stars, to idolize worship leaders, to idolize our community, to want other people to idolize me. All of these things would be a mistake. Even putting my own desires first is a kind of idolizing my own self-fulfillment. If what I'm interested in is what I find entertaining, what I find comforting, what I find uplifting, I may be missing the point. The search for what is true, what is right, and what is beautiful might be entertaining, comforting, and uplifting, but at times it is challenging. Because when we find the one who is true, the one who is right, the one who is beautiful, we can't help noticing next that although we were made in his image, that image is so messed up now. Are we even worthy to worship this God? Thank God that through Christ, God has dealt with that question. God does welcome us to worship him, even though we're messed up. If we'll just notice that, realize that, turn away from that, and turn to the true God, and join in what really is true worship.